Let's look at something called CSS declaration. So we have already used it, just actually we are defining it again because we have not used this terminology. But anyways, a CSS declaration consists of a property and a value, which means that if I say color red, then color is the property, red is the value, which is separated by a semicolon, and this whole thing and ends with a is separated by a colon and ends with a semicolon. This whole thing is called a declaration. You understood? So what is property? Property is the CSS feature. What type of what is the CSS feature I am using? Whether it is color, whether it is border, background, what thing I am considering here, that is the CSS feature property, and what is its value. Now again, this value must be valid, because if I simply put color colon 5, it does not make any sense, right? But if I say let's say font size or border, then if let's say font size I put 10 pixel, then it makes sense that okay, what you're trying to say. So which means that the values depend on the property and its data type should match, and if it is not matching, then basically the whole browser is going to say that it is invalid. Okay, now this property and value pair is called a declaration. So we already mentioned this whole thing is called a declaration, this pair, and I also mentioned that this must be separated by a colon. The main thing is that all these property names are case insensitive. So the following something like capital C, color with capital C, that is also fine. In fact, if you put any the whole thing also capital, that is also fine, because the whole thing is insensitive. In fact, I am just talking about properties here, but because I am talking about the names of various features, but this red is basically a valid value of the color in HTML. Actually, there are many default values which can be used as colors, but those color keywords are also case insensitive. In fact, the whole CSS is case insensitive, so don't bother about all those things. Simply, but as the scenario will come, I will discuss it there also. But for now, you can simply have a rule of thumb that the case sensitivity of these things does not matter. But at the same time, please try to there's a this is just a convention that please try to have all the property names and values in lowercase, though you can use something like this, but try to have it in lowercase. Now let's see. So now I will try to discuss something like this. So let's comment the external style sheet for now, and we'll try to create a normal style sheet, and in that, let's say we'll have div and color, let's say purple. Okay, so we okay, this is purple, but it is not clearly visible, so let's make it somewhat we'll see later what is font weight, but if it is bold, then it will be more clearly visible. That is fine. Okay, now I just wanted to show you one thing, that what happens if you give invalid values, right? And how to see that what values are applied here, right? So let's say I put the color teal here, and this thing is slightly greenish, this color teal is applied, but let's change the somewhat font size also to, let's say, 20 pixel, so that it is more clearly visible. Yeah, now see how we see that what are the styles applied here. For that, I'll just explain you. You can go to inspect. After that, I will actually explain it in detail in when I'm going to discuss the Chrome DevTools. But for now, for CSS, simple CSS debugging, I will show you that. See, actually, there are lots of styles, so you have to search where is this style. So I'll tell you simple ways how to actually achieve those. So there is this left arrow icon, right? If you click on that, then it becomes blue, and then you see, then if you then if you hover over the different various elements, then it can be highlighted. See, if you don't click, then nothing happens if you hover, but if you click this and it is enabled, then you can select various things, and if you select, let's say, hello, then you see its styles are visible here. From here you can inspect that, okay, what are the styles applied, what are not applied, what are invalid, valid, all those things will be available here. In fact, and you can change also things from here. So let's say you click here, then that again became black, right? So I again apply, then that is again teal. In fact, you can change from here also. Let's say you do something like red. Okay, so I'm doing something like this. Okay, so looks like I was doing some mistake. Anyways, so you can see that you can change colors from here, and again you can apply and non apply, but this is only for debugging. See, the point is that this thing is just being done temporarily for debugging. If you refresh, again everything will be reset. You see, if you refresh, then again everything is reset, but you can change and play with these values if you want to change these things. See, there is no styles in this second line, Ola, right? So if you see that first line is there, but in second line if you click, then see there are no styles, because we have not applied this, and we can test this by doing it here. So let's say we apply some styles on div also, on span also. Span is the second one, right? On span also, and let's say its color is let's say brown, right? Now I will see that, yeah, definitely its color is brown, and when I select this, then you can see that its color is brown. So now you can understand easily that, yeah, this is a very helpful tool if you want to get started and start trying to debug your CSS. Now I was trying to show you that, okay, let's say I put something like teal, this thing, it should not be in string, it should be simple. You see, like I just might have a plugin and that's why this color is here, but actually if you see in plain, let's say I commented it, then you see that simply it is written like this, that color teal, that's it, nothing much is there, right? So you can clearly understand that this thing has no quotes. However, if we put quotes here, let's say I put quotes here, then what do you think? Is the teal color going to be applied? Let's refresh. No, it's not applied. See why? Because this is invalid. Now I intentionally did that right now, so you might be thinking that, yeah, it's wrong, but if you have all done this in somewhere and you are not able to find this mistake, then again what you will do, you will go to the inspector, you will in the Chrome DevTools you will click and you will click on this, and then you will see the that Chrome will give you warning that, okay, you know what, I have not applied this color. Why? Because when you hover over it, then it might give you invalid property value, yeah, which means that this value is invalid. So please check your value. So again, very useful tool. Just get into the habit of using it, and it will save you a lot of time. Let's get back to here and refresh, and it's fine. Okay, so we are done with CSS declaration. Now let's try to understand, there is something called declarations block. What is that? As the name suggests, it's simply a block of declarations, a group of CSS declarations. So this thing, color red, this thing, like a property value pair, this thing is a declaration, this again, this second line is a declaration. But if we group a bunch of them and wrap them in braces, this thing is called a declaration block, CSS declaration block. Very simple, right? Now as I mentioned, it should be placed inside braces. The declarations inside the block are separated by semicolon, I already told you. And again here also, the last declaration block doesn't need to be terminated by semicolon, right? But everything in between must be separated by semicolon, otherwise CSS will tell it's invalid. But as I mentioned earlier, again it's a good practice to end each of the lines by semicolon, because you never know, right? Let's say you add a third line, and by mistake if you didn't put a semicolon here, then the whole CSS is going to be invalid. So what's the harm? Always put a semicolon at the end of each of the CSS declaration. Okay, and now we will revisit what we already did, that inline CSS. The formally I will introduce you to inline CSS. There is a HTML style attribute we already mentioned, and that HTML style attribute can be used as something like this, and it can be used to style any particular element. Now when I am introducing you to this here, then now we properly understand that, okay, what is this? This whole thing is a declaration, and this whole thing is a declaration. But there is another way of looking at it. Actually, you can understand that this whole thing is a declaration block without braces, and that is a valid style attribute as a string. Understand? So if you create a declaration block within braces, this and this, and I'm trying to say that the content of a CSS declaration block, if you remove the braces, that can be put inside HTML style attribute. So you can take like that rule of thumb. But anyways, whatever way you want to understand, that should be fine. So we can say that whatever rules we said there in case of declaration block, that same thing will apply here only. Because what we are saying, we are simply saying that remove the braces, and the rest of the things we can put. Again, we don't put new lines here, right? Because this whole thing has to be a string. So everything will be in one line, in line. But apart from that, all the rules apply, like the separations have to be done by semicolon. The last rule, the last declaration must be ending with may not be ending with semicolon, but the middle ones, the semicolons which are splitting different declarations, they must have semicolons. Okay, again the last one is optional. Now we'll say something called rules. Now this is like somewhat confusing. Some people say this thing like color red as rule, but that is wrong. Actually, this thing is a declaration, and when we put a set of declarations, something in like this, then this is called a declaration block. And if we put a selector in front of it, then it is called a rule set or a rule. A rule set is also known as a rule. So something like this, which I was mentioning, that a declaration block, and I put a selector. Selector means what? Which target HTML element or something we are trying to target here, and we will apply this style in that element, right? See, this whole thing is known as a rule set or simply rule. So when somebody says you CSS rule, don't think like this one line is a declaration. One line is a declaration. This whole thing with curly braces and with selector, everything, this whole thing is called a rule, or a rule set. Okay, so one or more selectors associated and the associated declaration block, the whole together thing is called rule set or rule. Now CSS selectors define the elements to which a set of CSS rules apply. Okay, so we'll study in more detail that actually there can be multiple selectors, same selectors with multiple rules. So for example, I can write again another rule, right? Div, and then let's say I am saying its background color. I can write another thing, which means that same selector can have a lot of CSS rules. But the point is that a particular selector tries to target which are the elements in the HTML document which we are trying to target, and all the corresponding CSS will be applied there. Okay, Now let's come back to inline CSS is done. Now let's come back to internal CSS. This also we already discussed. There is a simple style element. In the body of that style element, we can simply write our style sheet, and that will be a valid thing. And try to put this in head, just as a good practice. Because in fact, in earlier versions, outside head it was invalid. Now it is valid outside head also, but still try to put it at one place in head. This is plain and simple, and I mentioned that it can have more than. In fact, I showed you also, right? In fact, in one tag, in one within two tags, within one style element, you can have multiple CSS rule sets, right? So now we can use proper words. That time I did not say that this thing is called rule set or rule. So now I will properly say that a style element can have one or more rules. Fine. Okay. Again, I said that it is recommended to keep the styles inside head section, but it is perfectly fine if you don't put it in head section, but it's a good practice to put it inside head section. Okay. And we come to the last third method, where we mentioned that there is something called external CSS, where we can take our file, all the CSS, put it in a file, and then link that to the current document and as an external resource. And this linking part is done through a tag called link. Link tag can be used for many things. It is also used for linking style sheets, right? And in order to say that it is being used for linking style sheet, we use syntax something like this. We say rel style sheet, and then in href we give the path. We give the path of the style sheet. We can have relative path. This is right now it is a relative path. We can use absolute path. We can use full URLs also, right? That is fine. Now, what is this type text CSS? Okay, so we'll come back to that. As I already mentioned, that rel stands for relationship. That what is the relationship of that external document with the current HTML document. Href basically provides the path of the external resource, and as I mentioned, it can be relative absolute, which is local any file system, or it can be a remotely hosted document whose URL can be given and put here. Now come back to type. See, type specifies actually the media type, that what type of file is it. That media type, there is a word for this which is called meme type. So if you Google something like meme type, then you can read more about it. But basically the idea is that, yeah, there is a some file. So let's say text file is there, then I can say text slash plain. CSS file is text slash CSS. Let's say some image file is there, then I can say image slash JPG or image slash PNG. So these are actually the official meme types which are defined, so that it is easy to understand what type of file that is. Why it was not written in the first case I'll just mention. But anyways, so maybe in some other video I will explain that in detail. But you understand, the point is mostly like I said you, like normal text files are like text plain. Just now we saw text CSS. Similarly, all the HTML documents are actually text slash HTML, text slash JavaScript. And later we'll see that, okay, there are lots and lots like image slash GIF, image slash PNG, image slash JPG. So various files, types of files, audio, video, all types have some particular meme types which says that, okay, this file is basically what type of content is there inside that file. Okay, now you understood what is meme type. Now we'll say that why we did not put type here. Actually, the full syntax in for link element, and I forgot to mention that link is a self-closed element, right? There is no body of this link element, right? So basically, when you see here this last part, this is called self-closing. In fact, if you don't put like this, which means that here, if you have something like this, let's say I did not write here, right? That is also fine, but you should write something like this, ending with slash. So anything, if you so if it is a self closing, you can either put this or you can remove this also. But the point is that we'll see that it is a good practice to always use this just for simplicity, because actually in right now in HTML5 this thing is valid. Either you use this or this is valid, but later we'll see in React this thing is not valid. You have to use slash closing, right? So it will be a better thing that if you get into practice of writing like this, so that you don't commit a syntax errors or something later. So that is, but anyways, both are fine. In right now in raw HTML, both are fine. Okay. So now we are going to see that what are these selectors. So we discussed a lot of selectors here, right? So this this thing div, this thing is a selector, this thing is a selector, right? Okay. So in brief, we have mentioned, we have seen here that what is a selector, but now we are going to see in much more detail that what are the various types of selectors. We will see next.